As the COVID-19 pandemic looks to upheave the entire world economy, one industry that's been affected the most has been that of the music industry, especially its live sector. With concerts and festivals all over the world being canceled and postponed with no clear return in sight, I want to talk to some of the musicians that are trekking forward in spite of it all. As first up, I talked to Neil Berthier, a pop-punk and indie rock musician from New Orleans. He's currently based in Los Angeles and makes music under the name of PHONY, who released their second album, Knock Yourself Out, in August of this year. Here's a taste of its lead single, Waffle House. And then I talked to Shamir Bailey, an indie pop musician from Las Vegas who now resides in Philadelphia. You might have heard this song of his in a commercial once.
Like an eagle. This is my movie, stay tuned for the sequel. Seems so wrong, seems so illegal. Got this in the back like a foul ball free throw. Yep, you know that I go. This is me on the regular, so you know.
He performs just under his first name and released his 7th album, a self-titled LP, at the beginning of October. Firstly, I wanted to ask the two artists about how the pandemic affected their album announcements, as in the case of PHONY, the album had actually been done for years prior to the pandemic, being announced just a few weeks into lockdown.
Either way, for me, I'm just happy this is out because it's been like 3 years since I've written and recorded it, and I don't know, as far as the pandemic, like it made me look at it in a bit more of a less stressful way, where I'm like, I'm just putting out music. Like, if people like it, great. If they don't, I've already written 2 over the course of quarantine. Like, it doesn't really, like, I'm not depending on this for like getting on tours or like, you know, really pushing this one thing. For me, I tried to look at it in a positive light and just be like, well, you can't really do anything with this right now. Just put it out. It's gonna be fine, and you know, you're just putting music out. So that was why I enjoyed it. Once I got over the fact that, like, oh no, I'm like not gonna be able to tour and like do the thing.
I knew that the record wouldn't be finished until like May, and that's when it was completed. But then and we already had it planned around that time to finish it. So, you know, that was already a few weeks after the pandemic. And by this time, the lead single was already recorded and done and ready to be released as the first single in June. And that was pretty much the only pre-planned thing that we had. So the only thing that I had to work around was the single. I ended up doing the video completely by myself in quarantine, which turned out everyone really liked. But that was definitely in response to the pandemic. But like, I didn't have any previous visual ideas beforehand anyways. I was kind of going to do it on the whim, like once the single was just like done and mastered and everything. Then, because I have so many like creative friends and everything, I was just going to hit up one of my many like videographers or directors or like whatever and do something. So I wasn't really caught off guard, luckily, with the whole thing, just because like things didn't really start rolling until after the pandemic.
As lockdowns began to happen all across the United States, Neil was actually getting ready to head out on a tour that ultimately didn't happen.
We were supposed to do South by Southwest and then do a West Coast tour along with the Midwest. And we were starting in New Orleans, so I drove from Boston and Nashville, picked up my homies there who were playing with me at the time, and then we went to New Orleans, and dude, it was such a bummer. We had a showcase that was like Fiddlehead, Narrowhead, Portrayal of Guilt, who I've known Matt King for a long time, so I was really excited to just play with them. And then some other really sick, like Austin local, and us. And I just remember like talking to the promoter and like people just dropping out of South by left and right. And I was like, okay, well, we'll kind of see how this is all gonna play out. And it was just like hour by hour checking in and realizing none of this is gonna happen. And then we started to think, well, maybe it'll be over in a few weeks, so then maybe we can do the Midwest. And then a few hours later, that was not a possibility. We just have to call the whole thing. Everyone is canceling everything. We couldn't even do it if we wanted to, which, I mean, in the beginning, when we didn't know how severe it was, we did. But then once we really started to like be like, okay, well, this is like some, 28 days later shit. Like we just all have to go home. And then I think there was the part of me, like maybe in April, that started to think maybe the fall was going to happen. And then, a week into April, I was like, I don't think anything's going to happen. I think the whole year is canceled. And sure enough, that was the reality. And like, I don't know, it made me restructure how I was thinking about everything.
In part 2 of this segment, we'll further look into how the pandemic has changed Neil and Shamir's creative process and what they think is next for their careers in these uncertain times. In part 1 of this segment, we talked to musicians Neil Berthier and Shamir Bailey on how the COVID-19 pandemic affected their recent album releases and their initial reactions to the pandemic itself. Now in part 2, I first talked to Shamir on one of the best ways artists are able to support themselves right now, Bandcamp Fridays. In case you don't know, Bandcamp is an internet music marketplace that's been a go-to for any musicians to sell their music, even before the pandemic. The company announced in March that for the first Friday of every month for the rest of the summer, they'd be waiving their share revenue and donating all sales back to artists. This program ended up being extended for the rest of the year, but I'll just have Shamir explain their own personal experience with Bandcamp.
The Bandcamp Fridays is the first Friday of every month. They started doing it after the pandemic, where they waived their 15% fee, service fee, so that anytime anyone buys music on Bandcamp on the first Friday of the month, 100% of the proceeds go to the artist, or the label, or whoever owns the Bandcamp. And so what I've been doing for the most part, I didn't do it last month, and I didn't do it this month because my record happened to come out on Bandcamp Friday. But every Bandcamp Friday, I've been releasing exclusive demos, and completely like new songs and demos of just like songs that didn't make past records or just like stuff like that. Like I have so many just like lying around demos and songs, so just like been using an opportunity to like throw it up there just for Bandcamp Friday and then take it down so that it's super exclusive for the people who pay for it. And like, I've been making like thousands of dollars from it. And then also it's like really cool because then like, the like real fans get to have like these nice little like completely, exclusive like songs and stuff that's just like not been released and you can't get after Bandcamp Friday as well. So it's almost kind of like collecting like baseball cards to me.
While we briefly touched on it in part 1 of the segment, I wanted to also get both Neil and Shamir's opinions on what they miss and don't miss about touring.
I miss it so much. I can't think about it because if I do, then I'm just gonna get like super depressed and feeling hopeless and like there's no point to doing this, it's never coming back, all that kind of stuff. And like, yeah, I mean, that was like the whole reason I liked doing this in the first place, was just being able to travel and play shows. And like, obviously I love the writing and everything, but like, I like worked in venues. That was like I worked at like 3 different venues in Boston at the time and doing like multiple different things. And so like, it wasn't just like my touring wasn't going to happen. It was like, I don't have a job anymore. Like, so I was just knew that it was going to be really like just debilitating. And yeah, I loved that. I loved my work. I loved touring. I loved all that stuff. And now, I don't know. I miss it dearly, to answer your question. I don't know what it's going to look like now. And I don't know, they started doing the things with the pods and like the hermetically sealed drinks that you get at the door. And I'm like, dude, like, and like the drive-in shows. And it's like, dude, what? Like, I don't, sorry, I didn't mean to curse. I don't know if I can do that here. But I mean, I don't know. I just don't want to live in a world where like that's the standard and now everything's changed and like no one's going to want to go to a show ever again. And like, it's super rough. The more and more I think about it, I miss it a lot. That's my point.
I'm not even one of those artists that stay on the road. I actually take huge hiatuses between touring. But last year was a hiatus. So I haven't toured in 2 years. So like, this is the first time where I actually like miss touring. Because normally like it just feels like I enjoyed being on the stage and like performing, no doubt. But then a lot of times touring just feels like a necessary evil, you know? But now actually like I miss being exhausted and hungover.
And before I finish my interview with Shamir, I wanted to ask him if he had any advice for musicians releasing music right now during the pandemic.
You know, this was completely by accident for me because at this point when I picked the date, they were only doing the Bandcamp Fridays throughout the summer, and then they end up extending it to the rest of the year. So I would say definitely positioning the record to be on a Bandcamp Friday, because then people will be more inclined to buy it. And really make sure that the art direction and visuals are really together. I think that also helped me a lot this year. I was very like vigilant about my art direction and the cohesiveness of that and everything as well. Yeah, because it's just like people won't be able to like see your shows and like everything, so make sure the packaging and everything is pretty, you know.
I want to thank Neil and Shamir once again for joining me to talk about what it's like to be a career musician during the pandemic. If you want to check out Neil's music, visit 1-800-phony.bandcamp.com, and for Shamir, shamir.bandcamp.com.